So I'm really excited to break down this sample for you. I really don't know what I would classify this as. I don't know what genre it is. You can tell me. It's really kind of experimental, and there's a couple layers in particular that really stand out to me and I think are what made this sample unique. It's mainly the vocals that I used and then the synth that comes later on, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to show you all the VSTs, plugins and effects that I used, so let's get into it. So here's the intro, and trust me, it's going to make a lot more sense once the context of the next section comes in. This is what it sounds like. So you can already hear that bounce start to creep in, and it's probably coming from the bass, so let's just start with that. So this is the preset that I used for the synth bass in the Prophet 5 VST from Arturia, and I just added some saturation to it with a full wet mix and just some EQ cutting out the highs and kind of boosting where I found it to be warm. Interestingly, if you use FabFilter, and this might be the case with some other visual EQs, is you can actually see the notes down here. Especially more recently, I've been boosting where the note of the key of the track is, and I found maybe that's just kind of enhanced the tone. So I bounced that out, and then when I got the bass, because I always like to work in audio files, I ended up just adding a bit more saturation. I did a really low mix, but just added this warm tape, which I really liked. And I've actually got more distortion here on this bus 8 and a little bit of compression on bus 17. Nice bounce. So it's just got a cool rhythm to it. That was the bass, and then one of the next main layers I've got, which has a lot of processing on it. Without anything, it sounds like this. Now, this is actually a sound that I've run through my hologram microcosm, as I've been doing with a lot of sounds recently, as I'm making this new texture kit. And what I did was I sound shifted it, I pitched it up an octave, added some delay, some EQ, just cutting out a lot of the lows because you heard there was a lot of like low end and bass. I added some saturation, although using the smooth amp setting, so with a lower mix as well. And I added this towel filter, which is a plugin I really want to be using more because I realize it can be very powerful. So without, and then with. So it's just a cool tremolo effect, and then I've added halftime. And then I've added some compression here. And then RC20 just on the kind of default vinyl 1 preset, which I love this one, just cranked up the mix and gave it a bit more wobble, so you can hear that here. And just to get it out the way, I've also added this vinyl crackle, which I do very often in my samples, you might have seen before, and I've actually got it fading in, so it just really helps add that ambience to the sample. Now, this lead also comes from the Prophet 5 VST, and it's the turning lead into memories. And I've added a bunch of saturation as well here using that warm tape effect. I've added some compression and quite a lot of reverb on this one. So you can see I've cranked the mix, but I've brought the delay down so it sounds like it's in a bit of a smaller room. Also because the EQ is cut down to 4K, so the reverb's not happening on anything after that 4K mark. And I kind of like to condense that EQ range on a reverb because generally it will just help contain it in one space and not take up the entire frequency range, unless that's what I'm going for. But oftentimes it just helps things just not be so muddy, especially when I have other sounds playing. And then I've just added a little bit of EQ, just cutting up to 250 Hertz. And this is the lead pattern that I played. Such a beautiful, warm lead. I really, really like that sound, and I've been loving this Prophet 5 VST. It's a very good representation of what the actual Prophet 5 would sound like. So it's really cool that you can just have that in VST form, because a real Prophet 5, very expensive. And speaking of synths, I'm actually getting my first synth tomorrow, so in the next video you'll probably see it. It's the Moog Grandmother. I'm really excited to make some crazy videos and crazy sounds using it. But anyway, moving on. So then I've got this other texture, and this comes from London Rain's kit, and without any plugins it sounds like this. Such a cool sound. I've been using way more of these kind of interesting synth chops and just finding ways to manipulate them and add them. So sound shifted it to match the project tempo, added halftime with slightly lower mix, added a bunch of reverb, EQ just cutting out a lot of lows, highs, a bit more EQ cutting up to 750 hertz, and some delays, so now it sounds like this. So just making it sound more washed out and atmospheric with that reverb and that delay. And then the final layer here I've got is the vocal, and it sounds like this. So this is actually a vocal that I found on Splice, and I just kind of chopped up a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't find the original file. So I can definitely tell you I've added a little bit of halftime and some delay to that, probably a bit of reverb and some compression on this bus 17 again. So moving on into the next section, this is where things start to tie in and just get more of this bounce. And here it is. See what I mean? I don't know what kind of vibe I was on. I was definitely blending a few different kind of genres together here, but I like how it turned out because it has a bounce to it, which also has a nice melodic component to it, being that vocal, but then also the synth that comes in. I just think there's a lot of ways that a producer could flip a sample like this and throw drums over it or manipulate rhythms in it. So getting into the next lead that comes in, it sounds like this. So just same thing up an octave. And so this lead actually came from Sky Keys. It's the Go Back preset. I don't think I adjusted any of the parameters on it. I just added some reverb and some halftime, so it sounds like this. Without the reverb or the halftime, it was so pretty similar, but then with the halftime and the reverb. You can hear how the halftime's giving it that 8th note rhythm because that's what I've set here. So yeah, bounce that out, and that's the lead that we've got. Same layers as before, and then I have this new vocal which I also got from Splice, but without any of the plugins, it sounds like this. So a really cool kind of world vocal, and all I did was sound shifted it up 4 to match the project tempo. I added halftime, but I put it on the 16th notes and not a lot of mix, just so it gave it more of that halftime texture, but in a subtle way, and it keeps it very choppy and rhythmic because it's 16th notes instead of like a slower halftime effect. It's still so that's why I like halftime, because it just introduces that kind of low end and it just gives tracks such a cool texture. So that's why I use it so often as well. Then I've got some more saturation, about a 50% mix using the warm tape preset. I've got some EQ here, cutting out most of the highs, most of the lows. So it's very just like boxed in and just is there, keeping that rhythm, introducing something new. And I've got the Portal 4th shape pan, which I tend to use a lot, that's also giving it more of a chop. And you can hear it panning a little bit, so it's just, you know, it's a very dynamic vocal now, and just adding compression. So that is what I think makes up so much of this section, is this vocal. Like without. Now, obviously we have another layer here, which is doing a lot for the rhythm, but that vocal is, I think, what just like drives it home. And the thing I did here, which I find myself starting to do a little bit more, is get these like organic sounds off of Splice, because it's just a great library for them, and try and make them melodic. So this song Narcotics from So So Camo actually is a good example of this, where it has this like car seatbelt signal going off. And I think that is so cool to incorporate those real world situations in a musical way. So anyway, this is a more minor version of that, but it's the same concept. So it's that same beep sound, but what I did is just kind of like slightly stretch each one, or like move it a little bit off the grid, just so it wasn't the same quantized beep sound happening. So it just gives it a bit more of a human feel. I pitched it so it just suited, like if I play it without the sound shifter, but then pitched down. So it just sat a lot nicer when I pitched it down. So even when you are playing with rhythmic elements, even drums, anything like that, play around with the pitch, because it does make a difference. I added RC20 here, just using that same Vinyl 1 preset, and I added DH Flanger here. Even though it's a lower mix, it just makes it kind of a bit wider and a bit, you know, gives it that flanger effect. Added the Portal, Force Shape Pan again, just to give it that rhythmic chop. Added this UAD compressor. I added some reverb, not too much, but just enough to give it that slight echo, as well as the stock delay that I've got from Logic here, but only with a 5% mix. So yeah, those are the layers for this section. And then obviously I just have that first vocal come back in. So I find it quite interesting how these vocals work together, because they're very different styles. I don't know, like now listening back to it, like it kind of doesn't work, but it still really does kind of work. And I just found that this came out as a really unique vibe to me. So yeah, that's what I stuck with, and unapologetically so. So now leading into the next section. Now you can see I've labeled this one warm synth bass. It is a very nice warm synth bass. I love the sound of this. And that's coming from this Mini V4 VST, and this is also from Arturia. And the preset I use is a Velocity Gently key. And I think I adjusted some of the parameters here, but not too much. And this is what it played. All I had was a bit of EQ, some reverb. I used the Magic Switch plugin by Baby Audio. I believe this is a free plugin, so check it out. Just kind of a bit of a like kind of chorusy plugin. Added some delay and more RC20, and I just adjusted the width so it was wide. But yeah, this was the MIDI that I played in. Oh, like those low bass notes just sound so nice to me. Ugh, yeah, Love it, love it. Oh my god. So yeah, bounce that out, and all I did was just added some multi-band compression, just compressing and tightening that low end and just ducking slightly where a lot of the other synth or like the leads and stuff are sitting. Also, this layer was actually in the intro section. I forgot to mention it, but it's just a portion of the synth bass. But what I've done is I've sound shifted it up a full octave. I've added halftime, which kind of brings it down again, but with a triplet parameter on it, and I reversed it. And I've got some delay and this portal preset, which I'll take off for now, but just listen to the halftime effect. So it was just like a nice kind of swelly texture together. It just kind of creates this like nice dissonance. But then the main thing that I think really did a lot for this layer is this data extension preset in Portal, and it just gave it this kind of staticky, glitchy texture. So and I think that was the texture that just contrasted so nicely, because it's all these little like high-end artifacts mixed with that like low warm synth bass. And then I also had that percussion layer which came from a few different splice loops. So this was the first one with sound shifter, halftime, flanger. The flanger is something I like to use a lot on any kind of percussive elements in my samples, because it just helps keep them more subtle and kind of in a sort of wider stereo field, so they're not taking up the main kind of center of attention, cutting out a lot of the lows and a little bit of the highs here. So, and then I've layered that with a similar set of plugins on this layer, and it sounds like this. And then also with this one. So yeah, I bounced those out together, and then I did some more chopping, and so this is the percussion layer that I had after I had also cut out even more of the lows and done some funky dips here in the highs. So it just gave it some kind of shine, and it's just some interesting sort of high-end percussion that I think would layer nicely if there was some trap drums or hip-hop drums playing over the sample. So then leading into the final section, you'll hear that come back in, and then also with just like one new layer here. So gives it that bounce. And honestly, I think the ending of the sample is probably the bit that I would love to sample the most if I was adding drums. So the new layer here, these synth arps, which without anything on sound like this. Now this actually came from something I was experimenting with at the beginning of this sample when I was making it. So it was initially like a synth chop from one of my own sounds I'd taken, and I just got this kind of rhythm. And I thought it was a pretty cool sound and I would like to give it rhythm. So I added some plugins, added some saturation EQ. So you can really hear that saturation coming in. And so then when I brought it back over here, I just bounced it out again, adding a little bit more saturation, that warm tape. Yeah, then just using this EQ to cut out some more of the lows, adding more reverb, but with a very low mix, just so to keep it subtle. And then adding a tiny bit of delay and the fourth shape pan again, as always. But the delay and the reverb's really subtle, and all I wanted to do was just kind of saturate this layer a bit more, but also just kind of not have it be too abrasive. So So you can hear that delay just adding that extra bit of rhythm and then into that final section. But yeah, that's pretty much sample. The only other thing I did was kind of chop up this vocal a bit for some variation, just a bit more space. So yeah, again, this was honestly one of my weirder samples, a bit experimental and a mixture of several different genres, but I think it's important to exercise this kind of experimentation where you're pulling and taking things from different genres. You know, I had almost like this African type of vocal with some like Latin types of drums and warm synths and also the glitchy kind of like high-end textures that are happening. It's a weird mix of things, but I always want to be experimenting and just seeing what I can find, producing new vibes and emotions and feelings that I haven't really heard before or created myself before. And so whether you're using any kind of one-shot kits, drum kits, texture kits, or splice, anything like that, find all these cool sounds, process them and turn them into something new and just see what you can create. Because it's one thing to take someone else's texture or loop and kind of just keep it as it is, which is fine, but I think the true beauty and craftsmanship comes in bending and distorting and stretching those sounds to be something else. So yeah, I found this to be one of the more interesting samples that I made recently, and I've got a bunch of very different ones coming soon, so stay tuned for that. If you want access to any of my recent samples, you can download them in the link below. They're on my Discord server. It's paid, but it's a very, very fair price, and you'll get full access to all my recent samples. So that's something I'm going to be doing now. I've got the Discord community if you want to join and get feedback on any of your samples, your beats, anything like that. You can also check out my store for all my official kits and sounds. If you're a sample maker, definitely check it out. There's some great stuff and products that I've spent a lot of time and energy in. And yeah, I'm excited to get my Moog Grandmother. It should be arriving tomorrow. So the videos are going to get a really cool level up in production, especially music production. So stay tuned for that. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Thank you.